So thank you all for joining us tonight. It's really my honor to be here with these amazing women. I'd like to first start by acknowledging that the land we are on now is the ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and peoples. My name is Camille T. I'm the executive director and curator at the Center for Fine Art Photography, and we are here with Dionne Lee's show that's at the Gregory Alucar Museum through a partnership with Lynn Boland and the Gregory Alucar Museum. So we're really thankful for that partnership and working together. Tonight is special because we have Odette. We have Odette and we have Dionne Lee, Odette England, Dionne Lee, and Camille Dungy. And we're here for a poetry reading and a conversation. Dionne's work, like I said, Muscle Memory, is on exhibition now at the Gregory Alucar Museum. And originally, Odette England's work was going to be on exhibition at the Clara Hatton Gallery at the same exact time. And so we wanted to have a conversation between Dionne and Odette because their work has a lot of crossover. And so we had a conversation, Dionne and Odette and I had a conversation, and I realized I was not the best person to facilitate a conversation between them. So I said, well, who would be the best person to do that? And Dionne's face just lit up. She said, oh, Camille Dungy, which was really a coincidence because the day before, Katie Coxine, our board president, had said, well, what about Camille Dungy? And so when Dionne said, I thought, well, that's perfect. And of course, Camille was so gracious to be here tonight. We're really honored to have you. And so that's how this conversation started. And then Odette's show got pushed to October through December. And then she was going to be here, but then something else happened. And so this is the COVID version of a talk that was going to be in person, and now is sort of, it's being recorded, and of course Odette's being streamed in. So that's how this all came about. But of course we wanted to continue and do this conversation. So I want to start with introductions. Dionne Lee received her MFA from the California College of Arts in 2017. She's exhibited work at the Museum of Modern Art, Aperture Foundation, the School of International Center for Photography in New York, throughout the Bay Area, and among many, many other venues. Odette England holds a Master's in Communication, Culture, and Language from the University of South Australia, and an MFA in Photography with honors from the Rhode Island School of Design. She received a scholarship to complete her PhD at the Australian National University and has exhibited her work in more than 100 museums and galleries worldwide. Camille Dungy is her debut collection of personal essays, A Guidebook to Relative Strangers, 2017, is a finalist in the National Book Critics Circle Award. She's also the author of 4 collections of poetry, most recently Tropic Cascade, winner of the Colorado Book Award, and she was awarded a Guggenheim Fellowship in 2019. So those were our 3 incredible women tonight, and we were going to start with a poetry reading by Camille, and then Camille will facilitate the conversation with Odette and Dionne. Thank you all for being here.
Thanks, Anita and Dionne and Odette for making all this possible, and those of you who are with us in body, and those of you who will be with us on the interwebs when that happens. This is the first time since March of 2020 that I've read my poems to somebody while not just sitting at my computer. So you all are here for some sort of landmark event of some kind. And I thought that maybe, therefore, I should read a poem that has not been read while sitting in my room at my computer. A poem written around this time last year. Origin story. Outside my window is the beginning of half my poems. The others start outside my door. In each case, the window is my body. I am always on the other side of the door. All summer, every place around me caught fire. The flames' orange haze spilled into my blood. And when I was thinking about what I might read today, I spent time with both of your work, and just the number of overlaps in the landscape really struck me so much. Odette, where a lot of it is was taken in Australia, but the kind of bush outback landscape feels incredibly familiar to me from my time in Southern California. And Dionne's work is in the Berkeley Hills and the Oakland Hills, where I also spent a lot of time in my life. And so this kind of chaparral, it's called chaparral because as the Spanish conquistadors rode through that landscape, the kind of burrs and things on the plants were catched in the chaps. And so that's how they named that kind of shrubby, manzanita and sage kind of landscape, chaparral. So I thought I'd read a poem that has some of that landscape in it, and also that Fort Collins will show up at some point. Not named, but it is. This will hurt me more. Don't make me send you outside to find a switch, my grandmother used to say. It was years before I had the nerve to ask her why switch was the word her anger reached for when she needed me to act a different way. Still, when I see some branches, wispy ones, like willows, like lilacs, like the tan yellow forsythia before the brighter yellow buds, I think these would make perfect switches for a wedding. America, there is not a place I can wander inside you and not feel a little afraid. Did I ever tell you about that time I was 7, buckled into the back seat of the Volvo before Volvos were a thing America required? My parents tried, despite everything, to keep us safe. It's funny. I remember the brown hills sloping toward the valley, a soft brown welcome I looked for other places, but only found there and in my grandmother's skin. Yes, I have just compared my grandmother's body to my childhood hills. America, I loved them both, and they taught me each things I needed to learn. You have witnessed, America, how pleasant hillsides can quickly catch fire. My grandmother could be like that, but she protected me too. There were strawberry fields, wind guarded in that valley, tarped against the cold. America, you are good at taking care of what you value. Those silver gray tarps made the fields look like a pond I could skate on. As the policeman questioned my dad, I concentrated on the view outside the back window. America, have you ever noticed how well you stretch the imagination? This was Southern California. I've lived there all my life and never even seen a frozen pond. But there I was, in 70-degree weather, imagining my skates carving figure 8s on a strawberry field. Of course my father fit the description. The imagination can accommodate whoever might happen along. America, if you've seen a hillside quickly catch fire, you have also seen a river freeze. The surface looking placid, though you know the water deep down, dark as my father, is pushing and pushing, still trying to get ahead. We were driving home, my father said. My wife and my daughters, we were just on our way home. I know you want to know what happened next, America. Did my dad make it safely home or not? Outside this window, lilac blooms show up like a rash decision the bush makes each spring. I have lived in Southern California for decades. A pond here killed a child we all know. For years after that accident, as spring bloomed and ice thinned, my daughter remembered the child from her preschool. And now, it's not so much that she's forgotten. I feel like I skipped a line. I'm going to go back a bit. I haven't lived in Southern California for decades. A pond here killed a child we all knew. For years after that accident, as spring bloomed and ice thinned, my daughter remembered the child from her preschool. And now, it's not so much that she's forgotten. It's more that it seems she's never known that child as anything other than drowned. My grandmother didn't have an answer. A switch is what her mother called it, and her grandmother before her. She'd been gone from that part of America for over half a century, but still that southern soil sprang up along the contours of her tongue. America, I'll tell you this much. I cannot understand this mind, where it reaches. Even when she was threatening to beat me, I liked to imagine the swishing sound a branch would make as it whipped toward my body through the resisting air. She'd say, "This is hurting me more than it's hurting you." I didn't understand her then, but now I think I do. America, go find me a switch. Okay, thanks for your patience. And I'm going to read just maybe one more poem because I'm really excited to return to this conversation with these lovely people about how the landscape can inform our art and our lives and the kind of back and forth of danger and delight we have when we live on this planet as attentive people. We've had some elections in this country in recent years with various outcomes that have various positives and negatives for people. But one of the most interesting things to me in our 22 election, Odette and Dionne may or may not know this, but one of the things on the ballot in Colorado in the 2020 November election was whether or not rules would be reintroduced into the western slope of Colorado. And in fact, that was approved. And so gray wolves are back in Colorado for the first time in many years. And they're on the western slope, and we're here on the eastern slope, but those are rangy little guys, right? right? Well, so I'm curious how long it'll take them to learn to our sign. Trophic cascade. After the reintroduction of gray wolves to Yellowstone, and as anticipated, their culling of deer, trees grew beyond the deer stumps of the mid-century. In their upreached, songbirds nested, who scattered seed for underbrush, and in that cover wore into snowshoe hair. Weasel and water shrew returned, also bull, and came soon hawk and falcon, bald eagle, kestrel, and with them hawk shadow, falcon shadow, eagle shade and kestrel shade haunted newly buried wells, where mule deer no longer rummaged, cautious as they were now of being surprised by wolves. Berries brought there, while undergrowth and willows growing now right down to the river brought beavers who dammed. Muskrats came to the dams and tadpoles, came to the night song of the fathers of tadpoles. With water striders, the dark gray American digger bobbed in fresh pools of the river, and fish stayed, and the bear who fished also culled deer fawns, and to their kill scraps came vulture and coyote, long gone in the region until now. And their scattered seed, and more trees, brush, and berries grew up along the river that had run straight and so flooded, but thus dammed, compelled to meander, is less prone to overrun. Don't you tell me this is not the same as my story. All this life, born from one hungry animal, this whole new landscape, the course of the river changed. I know this. I reintroduce myself to myself, this time a mother, after which nothing was ever the same. Thank you. But I feel like the first question that I want to ask of the two of you, and are just introduced into the room, is it doesn't feel accidental that the idea would be to have a writer come and talk to you. I love working with visual artists and thinking about the ways visual artists work and see the world and manipulate the world and think about the world. And I see in both of your work a kind of attention to storytelling, an attention to kind of really finding ways to use language and reinvent language in ways so that people can see the inside of your head differently and also the outside of the world differently. So I think my first question is just, what's the role of narrative, of storytelling, of language as you speak it and write it in your art, and how you then manipulate it in the visual arts?
You go, Lindsay.
Okay, I just have to check in. Yeah, I think for me, a lot of my work is really rooted in my own personal experiences, so I feel like in many ways I'm just telling my story, I guess, or a story that's very parallel to my experiences. And the way that I really think about how that gets translated in the work is through text and the work itself, which a lot of that text comes from my source material, usually those my survival books, and I tried to create little different new narratives from that text. I'll pull it, I'll kind of collage it in a sense, and like move words around and try and make, storytelling, I haven't thought about storytelling, but I guess that's pretty close. But I would say, it comes from a personal story, and that just gets translated.
Right, similarly, I think growing up in Southern Australia, in rural Southern Australia, part of the fabric of education and storytelling from parents and from teachers and from the community, at least where my parents had their farm, was that the language of fire had its own, and land especially, had its own language. And if you tended it with care, and if you treated it with the respect of any kind of body, and you saw land as a form of body, that it could reveal things to you that perhaps wouldn't otherwise become apparent. And that our bodies as a form of labour, as a form of storytelling, working with land, working with soil, in my case working with bushfire ash in a very direct and material way, might not necessarily tell a narrative story, but might be able to articulate things that a camera simply can't. I feel like a camera can show us things in some sense, in some ways very clearly, but in other ways it skips over things or misses things entirely. That putting our hands and our labour into a photograph and onto a photograph can do in a really special way, like Dionne being very hands-on in the darkroom, like me forcefully rubbing ash into a print.
I'll also just say that, photography is also like a storytelling medium on its own, so there's also that element. I think for me, I interjected that through collaging the images, and so that's another way of kind of, you present a narrative through photograph, like Odette said, the photograph kind of like, well, it can never complete there's always something that's being left out, and so I think our own separate interventions with that is like a way of retelling or, adding to a story narrative.
I think it's so great, and that segues into another thing that I want to think about, which is the intense use of, I feel like collage is just like a simplified way of saying this, but and I'm just thinking in my own writing, like how frequently the work just goes in multiple different directions at the same time, and somehow things have to kind of get cut up and replaced and represented in new ways for it to be viewable and that I can articulate. But it feels in both of your work also that it seems to be partially about correcting erasures and correcting omissions in the record, so that the photographic record alone has left out a lot of what is important to you to see. So can you talk a little bit about that, about how you're using art to present who or what you have seen missing?
I don't know which one to go first, but I will go again, just to make sure. For me, I'm really speaking to this long history of landscape photography and how America has been depicted through time as this kind of empty land meant to be, used for economic gain, right? Or just, and kind of the erasure of the history of genocide in this country through these images, these like beautiful, lush landscapes by living in them. Sorry, what was the question? Just canon and not necessarily take on the responsibility of correcting something or saying like, I just feel like I'm actually just going to add more information in there for, you know, to clarify maybe what the class has left out or what like this division in this particular, which part of the meeting has left out. And yeah, so.
It's such a great question because, and building on something Dionne just said about adding to things, is that photography can be such a reductive process. Yeah, that's right, it is a process. But it's also a practice of control, you know, controlling exposure or controlling perspective. And, you know, with wildfires, with land, we so often use a language and a discourse of control about controlling places, control burns, fires burning out of control, climate control. But with collage or any kind of enacting ourselves onto a photograph to layer it, to change it, to experience it differently, we're assuming a kind of control, but we're also letting go of it, and we're changing the sort of the frame of it being just a square or just a rectangle, and kind of embracing its more capricious qualities. And that's a really exciting and also kind of scary place to be, because you don't always know what the result is going to be. The photograph becomes very much this starting point, and you don't know what other marks or scars, or you used the word attentive, Camille, and I wrote that down because I thought the photograph is so good at being attentive, but I think certainly in my work and perhaps in Dionne's too, there's a kind of attentiveness, we're paying to it, but then we're expanding into something else and something other.
Yeah. I also think people expect photographs to always be telling the truth, because you think it's always representing reality as it truly is, and I think we know that that's not the case.
Well, I love the story of your, with the 40 acres, like thinking that you could get an acre and like getting like 50 square yards or something like that, but just the scope of these stories being so different. And then Odette, how you use old cameras or old expired film. And so, yeah, I know you've had your art talk, but I just want to hear a little bit more about material and how the material you're working with is informing the meaning and the modes that you're conveying.
I think for me, mine's very much this idea, my practice and certainly with this work comes from this idea of wanting to reactivate the surface and to the surface of the photograph, I mean, and to view it as a place of inscription, but while thinking of it as a place to inscribe things onto or into, is that not closing off its own picture, its own texture, that I feel like land is so good at having all on its own. And at one point I did think maybe I'll just create a sculpture of the bushfire ash itself, because it's such a unique, powdery, yet gritty, heavily scented thing, but there felt something really necessary about putting that reality back that the camera could not show in the images I was making on film. It is putting that back in and making that a way of trying to amplify the subject while also becoming the subject of amplification.
Yeah, for me the surface is also really important. In the lab that's downstairs is a treatment where I've been rubbing them with graphite, kind of sometimes can create this kind of glistening effect if it's in the right light. And that listening actually reminded me of the piece you brought up, the test of 40 acres, which was your last night. You heard this, but it was made out of an emergency blanket that you would get in one of the earthquake emergency kits, and I didn't know what 40 acres was, and I just started making this thing, and I thought that I would just get to 40 acres and not, and then eventually I figured out that I was going to get there. But the graphite actually, to me, really speaks back to the reflective nature of that material, that of a piece I made like years prior. And even though in the photograph it touches 40 acres, you just see that it's just kind of like a white kind of rectangle. In real life, I was trying to lay that huge sheet out by myself in the middle of nowhere. It was noisy, it was really windy, and just like the effort that it took to make that and fail at getting to the size I wanted to go back to your question, I think really is what informs the work and actually kind of informs the rest of my practice, which is kind of embodying, putting into just trying to understand the scale that I had no reference for, and then understanding how the 40 acres also made me understand how the scale of the loss of that for the few people who had never received that, yeah.
All right, so let's talk loss. And so frequently as women artists and as black artists, black women artists, like there's this idea that loss and trauma and violence and danger is going to somehow be the center of all things in our art, and it is in fact a center in all three of our arts, and yet there's delight and wonder and beauty and a kind of real peace that also exists in all of our work. So can you talk, like for me, that toggle between those is sometimes really hyper-conscious, like I sometimes find myself like making myself smile as I'm writing to try and find the space of joy, because that's where so much of our humanity is lodged, and just trying to figure out how I can not personally get and not crush my writing under the weight of centuries of violence and trauma. So what do you consciously do in your work to balance those histories and those legacies, and then what do you see showing up in your work that then delights you?
Yeah. I think you're right, it is a center, but it's not like the center for me, or I try not to. I think it had to be the center for a little bit just so I could understand my own relationship to that history of trauma, but similar to you, when I'm making my work, I'm actually having a great time usually. And I'm like jamming out in my studio, and I'm just, or a dark room, and I'm really enjoying myself. And then when I get to actually start to look at the work and collage and cut things up and rearrange, that's, I think, more when the heaviness sets in, because that's when I'm like, literally facing some of the dark parts I'm trying to wrestle with. But it's, I am kind of a pessimist, so I don't know. I have joy when I'm making when I try to talk about my work, it is hard to escape that part of myself, but I don't know, it's a tough question. I think it's a constant balance I'm trying to walk, and I think when I moved from really not just thinking about my relationship to the outdoors, but trying to, when I began thinking about what it means, what survival would mean, that was actually a point of optimism in a way. Until then I was like thinking about climate chaos and like all the situations I would have to try and survive, not just even obviously thinking about everyday survival, as you mentioned earlier, like where you always feel a little unsafe everywhere here. It's all just jumbled up for me, honestly, and it's a constant, I think it's a part of my practice to keep that in check and to balance those opposing forces inside why I say that, because I am literally always practicing that, like, just every day, right?
Yeah, the first thing that came to mind was something that you mentioned when you were doing your reading was about the hungry animals, and I thought, wow, loss is probably one of the hungriest animals of all, and permeates all parts of life in different ways. And some of the stories that I love most are stories that are filled with immense loss, because they're transformative in a way that I feel like loss can only bring. So if there's something, for me, when I'm in my studio, I think back to the stories that surrounded the making of the work. And, just a quick one, there was my mother and my daughter were with me for 6 weeks, 3 or 4 times a week, travelling in and out of the fire zone, rescuing and rehoming animals. And there was a guy, a local farmer, with his dog in his truck, who pulled up to ask what we were doing. He saw my big camera, and I explained what I was doing, and he could hear my accent, and he figured I was okay to be there. And I asked him the name of his dog, and he said it was a tiny little black and white terrier called Panda. And I asked if I could pick him up, and he said yes. And so I picked up this little dog, and he said, "Listen, would you mind? I'll be back." And he drove off. And I was then holding this little dog Panda with Mum and my daughter Evelyn, and he was gone for 10 minutes and 15 minutes, and we thought, is he ever coming back? And when he came back, he was very, very visibly upset and had been crying. And he said, he asked me to put Panda in the front seat of the car, passenger side. And he got out and he shut the door. And he said, I just couldn't let my dog see me upset anymore. And this man, and he went on to say, he lost his farm, he lost acres and acres and acres of land, he lost almost all of his livestock. And it was a moment of weight that no one could fix, and that he just needed this 10, 15 minutes of being away and being alone and feeling like he could get back some control over things that he felt he had no control over. So that's the kind of thing that I replay as I'm making, that I'm not just making work that is beautiful and transformative on the wall. It comes from a place where I've witnessed a kind of loss that I would never want to witness again.
Wow. I just had a conversation today with a novelist named Jean Penguin, and she shared the preface for a translation of her novel. And she tells the story of she lost her home when Santa Rosa, outside of Santa Rosa, and she was on her way to where she and her husband were in a shelter, and they saw a man in the gas station outside of I-5, and he had a sign that said, "Paradise, fire, victim, it helps." And so they had a conversation about this shared loss, except for Jean lost all her worldly possessions, almost 10,000 books, all of this. And the man then asked, "Did you lose anyone?" And she had not, and he lost his son and sister in the fire. And so all of a sudden this balance of art, as you're saying, that I can write about this and I can talk about this on a landscape scale. Each time you add these next levels and the next levels of history of individual human loss, of the loss of all these habitats for these creatures, the weight of what we're working with increases, and for me, the responsibility of what I'm working with to really clearly describe these worlds. I think we're all kind of working sometimes out of spaces that are hard for people who don't live in the American West, or don't live in Australia, or haven't experienced moving from a major metro region to someplace hard to understand. And so I wonder then how much you're thinking as you're working, how much you're thinking about the importance of conveying a world that is a world away from so many people, conveying it in such a way that it can be close and really deeply felt, versus how much you're just thinking, I'm just telling my own story, and those who come to my story, those who don't. I feel like those are two different starting points for a sense of responsibility.
I think I try and start, this is for like, I think just the health of my practice, I try and start when this is my story. Because sometimes if the motivation is to, like I mentioned earlier about not wanting to correct what I had, if the motivation is to take on so much that it then kind of interrupts my actual thinking process, because it can feel so overwhelming to take home what I want. But then obviously, before the work makes it out into the world, I really try to deeply consider, how it can be read and what value I think will come across to the viewer. But it's a tricky balance, and I think this is where the kind of pessimistic part of me comes up again, where as you both were telling stories about these people's individual losses, I'm reflecting on my own experiences with that as well. My turn into looking at survival came after a really terrible experience I had, where a woman was murdered at a BART station in Brooklyn. Her name was Wilson, and I happened to just get off the train at one time, and it all happened very close to me. And I realized much later, I was doing all this work around survival, I was actually working through this other thing that happened. And so I think that just to go back to your question, I think it starts with me. But after that situation, it did, but I didn't know that it was starting with me. Whatever order it happens, it does always start there, personally.
Right, similarly, there's a start from me working out or outward working into me. But, I feel like every story I'm trying to articulate or tell with photography in any way has a kind of emotional quotient that I don't know or recognise to begin with. It's only when I'm reconciling it toward the end of its life of making that suddenly things become more clear. And I have to see things on the wall. I have to, in many cases, re-photograph it, because I need to see a photograph as a material being before I will even understand what I've been doing and how my hands have been moving. And if I've seen something or read something or heard a story or witnessed something that's all feeding in, I'm just blissfully, unconsciously taking it in until I take the moment, a kind of extended silence of, oh, I see now. It's always been there, but my 130 odd words I have in the English language just for looking, witnessing, noticing, haven't been available to me until I take a breath and realise what's been feeding into it. It's like I didn't realise that I had all these images of flames that I've been storing on my desktop were coming out in the work. I kept thinking, why am I bending these huge pieces of canvas in this way? Why are they in this shape? Why am I so resistant to putting them in a frame? And I thought, because I want them to behave like the thing I'm talking about. I want them to be these failed objects. I want them to be uncontrollable. I want them to be everything that I felt and that I saw at that time. I just didn't know. But that's what I wanted.
Anita, I can talk to these two women forever. Where are we with time?
We have about 15 minutes
Total.
for an hour.
So we should probably let the audience have a little bit of time. Yeah, so how about you all kind of ask a few questions, and then maybe I'll ask the final question before we wrap up. There's one in the back, yes.
Camille, I love that you were making the writerly connection via storytelling. And I was surprised by that because, I mean, in a good way, because where I was when I was looking at the art was all the symbol and pattern. And I was seeing how much you also work like a poet, Dionne. So I'm just curious if you could talk about pattern, shape, symbol.
Let's repeat the question just in case. The question was that I asked the question in terms of the story, for the stories, and the question is that there's so much pattern and symbol and shape, and would Dionne and Odette talk a little bit about the importance of symbol and pattern in your work?
Yeah, I see symbols as kind of like a place for myself or a viewer to kind of get lost and apply your own association with. It's actually funny that we're all telling our stories about like personal experience connecting to work. I was like, this is all just so psychological. It's so just like me working through all of your stuff. But I think, you know, the repetition and pattern and things like that is kind of it's like a true visualization of my processing, essentially. And I think that one of the symbols that I talked about last night or I should say images, is this picture of a lean-to shelter. And for me, that was so potent because it resembled more of a trap to me than something that would protect you or keep you safe. And I find that duality in a lot of the images that I trap to, the images that I make myself, the images that I collect, just like in my own personal little shoeboxes. But I love leaving space for multiple meanings and multiple entry points and ways to understand something. So just like that shelter either being something that's protective or something that can trap you. It's interesting for me. And I love things that there's poetry. Like I actually would like at one point in my life I thought I wanted to be a writer or something to be that.
It's a great question because for the longest of times I didn't think that I had any recurrent symbols or indicators or marks that carry through my work, and until I stand a long way back from things, and this in part goes back to the previous conversation, I just don't see them. It's like the cheese in like the front and center of your fridge that you swear is there but you can't find it. And until I realised how often I'm using my hands, how often I'm embracing failure. It's like I put on my boxing gloves in the morning, get into the studio and go right photography, let's go a few rounds. Because I really like the challenge of fighting against photography's perceived correctness and exactness and seamlessness and precision, and completely obliterating that and messing it up and having it fail and self-destruct and then turn into puddles of mess around me and then trying to pick up the residue. And so much of the things that I'm attracted to are browns, soils, residue, things that are broken, things that are rusty, things that are the exact opposite of just about everything photography is. So the two of us have this really uneasy love affair where I cannot let them go, because photography is a plurality in my life. So they're always there. And the little group of us do these little rounds trying to figure out, who's in control today, who's going to have the one up, and we shake hands at the end of the day and we start again the next day. So the recurrent visual things might be these browns and this labour and these breaking of things, but it's actually my relationship with photography as a medium, I think, that I like to break it apart and see if I survive and it survives, they survive, to go on around another day.
Yeah. I remember this hilarious, but also really honest and telling story from my early years in teaching, where one of my friends was teaching a class, and a student came up and said, I'm sorry, the piece I'm supposed to do for class is going to be a little late. It's all written. I just have to go back in and put the symbols in. And that idea that artists must have the symbol already, and it's put on the outside of the piece, as opposed to just looking down and oh, look at that. Look at this thing that keeps coming up from inside me, like you're saying with the bit of paper or something, that is something that I have to then kind of corral and tackle and work with, but it's not like I sit down and say, bit of paper, show me the thing. Sometimes though, I say that, right? And then sometimes you do, right? Sometimes you do the opposite. You're I'm going to work with this material and see what it shows me. But not necessarily what symbol it reveals, but what else it does. All right. See how easy that is? You just have to get us started. And then we'll just keep going. Yeah.
One thing I have to say is it's amazing to me to see poetry and visual. Poetry written next to poetry and visuals. And I always think about visual poetics in terms of expressing the reasoning behind how the studio practice pulls things together in certain ways. But the question that I'd love to hear more about, I think about it as the studio is also exploration, improvisation, and then also studying it like we're talking and seeing those increments and trying to find avenues of dragging some of those ingredients into certain circuits of reason or expression.
I love what you said. I'm trying to do the summarizing into a question that we can make sure that Odette hears and the internet audience hears. Can you kind of reframe a question at the end there?
Yeah, I think, okay, one way to put it is I'm always looking at visual data, and sometimes I'll see something that strikes a chord, and I might take a photo briefly, not me doing it as a photographer, but capturing that information, and then having that information kind of sitting around as what I call ingredients, and that sometimes I open my spice cabinet of ingredients, and I look at certain things that relate to an idea that I like to express. But I don't have an answer on how that expression is going to be melded or put together. So it's how to conjure these pieces of information and how to mess with them in different ways.
Yeah. I think you guys probably heard that. So how do you deal with your spice cabinets, the ingredients that you have to create a visual poetics that kind of conjures what it is that you need to say? Broccoli?
Yeah, that's I mean, one thing I can say is think about jazz music and improvisation.
Mm-hmm.
And how you jive with the spirit of what's around you, and also question what you see, and then interact sort of in different ways with.
I mean, I think you're literally describing the making process.
Yeah.
Which, yeah, different, everyone has a different spice cabinet, again, for different ingredients. But I relate to that in the sense that I do a lot of collecting and I do a lot of content reviewing my work, so I do practice a lot to sort through often. And And I think for me, it's intuitive. Like, I don't always know what I'm looking for. For a long time, at the beginning of looking at survival skills, I was really into these images of ropes, and I thought that I just wanted to learn how to make special knots. But actually meant that I ended up making a 40-foot rope, which I made as like a running green line that would be on a sailboat. It was like on a pulley. And, you know, that was just an example of, like, okay, I'm working on these boats, I'm trying to learn how to make cordage or out of, like, naturally, but, you know, stems from other plants. But it led me to just somewhere else. I don't know if that was really, but I feel like that was one way that I worked through kind of like having multiple ingredients. You know, just like, okay, I guess I'm just gonna I'm gonna coat this rope for you, I'm gonna make this. That's for me, I guess, but.
Right, and I think for me, with this work, it's different for everything that I work on. There'll be a different approach, and it's not I'm not following a recipe, I'm not even following a list. I quite often don't know what it is that I'm trying to concoct, if anything. Mostly I think that it's this creative experimentation and playing with pictures or playing with materials and seeing what comes of that play, and not losing sight of the fact that play is just such a wondrous, underrated experience that somehow dissipates as we get older. I resist it with everything I've got, because that, for me at least, is where the magic is, and to some extent plays into this work that I made in Australia. I wasn't planning to be there for the bushfire season, that was happenstance. I collected newspapers. I've never collected newspapers before, but I collected them because I was so interested in how photography failed so dismally to capture what was actually happening with these fires and how it was being reported and how people were seeing it and witnessing it and understanding it through visual forms that seemed so inaccurate to me, being there and seeing it firsthand. But then, and I only had expired film. My film was heat damaged because of where we were, and I didn't think the pictures would amount to anything. I had no intent of using them for pictures at all. And I collected ash because I love the smell. Like, I love the scent that it has. It has this eucalyptus, African boxthorn combination that just reminds me of home and makes me long it even more. And I had absolutely no intent in spending hours being covered from head to toe in ash and having ash in parts of my body that is still probably there, but I can't eradicate from my body now. But I felt like I had to be invested in it, and so often it just comes from a desire. It comes from a material talking to me, and I'm just listening to it. I'm listening to it, begging, play with me, have fun with me, see what comes of me, if anything, and just explore.
How about one more question from the audience? It's always hard when you ask the last question.
I love that you both embraced failure. That there's that's such an element in what you both do, and that you feel so strongly about it. And it's not something that I hear people talk about very often. That comfort with it, that sort of almost racing. Well, didn't you say that, Dionne? Something about
Yes.
racing to failure?
Training to failure.
Trained to failure. I'd love to hear more about that, because it's really exciting to me. Because we're such a perfectionist-oriented society, and you're saying something completely different.
Yeah. I kind of want to describe the thing that you're talking about, the training to failure. I make little fake memes that are like just from collages, not like the internet memes kind of. I have one of this young 12-year-old girl who's like rock climbing and it just says training to failure underneath it. It's in my studio and it's my motivational poster. But I said and for me personally, I honestly take that in the studio, but also just like in general, in my classrooms, I tell my students that every mistake is a lesson, and there's never. I guess I don't think failure is actually real. Like, I don't think you ever really fail. I think you learn you learned something that you didn't know before through something difficult perhaps. But I also, with Odette, we were saying about play being so important, I see very related to this idea of failure or accepting failure, or taking that as an opportunity for deeper understanding and learning. Because I do think that play is another thing that artists don't talk about much too, or about embracing. Like it's a little bit, I think, of like a weird secret that I don't think needs to be secret anymore, or should ever be secret, because that's how you know, experiment with your recipe, right? To go back to that question. And I think just even, again, thinking about my own practice and working in the darkroom and spending hours on prints that I then decide to cut up and turn into something else, is there's so much labor that goes into just printing the images that I want to use for a collage, and then even that, I feel like, is a way of, not failure, but a way of kind of, it's almost like I'm setting myself back, so I don't actually need to do it that way, but there's something that feels very important about putting an envelope into something that will then go through another iteration. Because again, I think it opens up a space that gives me just a space to deepen my own knowledge and understanding about what I'm doing.
Yeah, failure is such a dirty little word, and it's perhaps
so
because
it's
my-
sorry. You don't like to say
Right. Well, they're intangibles, right? We like things that are tangible and solidified, and failure's binary is success, which is even worse. You know, you couldn't have an unhappier partner, I don't think. But, you know, using the cooking analogy, there was a time when everything had to be perfect on the plate, and then deconstructed meals became really cool and edgy because they did the exact thing. They went off the plate and there was sauce coming off this. And a lot of my thinking about failure comes from ignoring it, actually, because like Dionne, I don't believe it's a real thing. It's this fantastical thing that we built in to make us feel better when things go wrong. But also, from growing up on a farm, there was no room for failure. You had to improvise anything. We were so remote. This was pre-internet and pre-cell phone, but you didn't have a shop to go to, or a manual to turn to, or any form of guidance or rule book. And failure is so connected to rules and structure. Our entire 24-hour days were ruled by things completely out of our control, the weather, for one. If you needed to fix your car, or a fence, or a cow got out, or something, you had to make it up. And that's what I love about having had that as a background and using that. I think about that a lot in my practice. You just make it up. Because if I didn't have that big bucket of failures that's just over here to my left, that Penelope on Grupo, the photographer, the first thing she does when she does a studio visit goes straight to the bin and looks inside to see what's in there. Because that's where all the magic is, that's where all the excitement is held. Without knowing that's there and being able to use that as collateral, to use that as inspiration, what a dull practice I would have. Everything would be so manufactured and homogenized and ordinary.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you speak to that in your practice?
I love hearing them talk about that. I think, people ask writers a lot about writer's block, and I feel like my response to that question is really good because I don't believe in writer's block. I do believe that sometimes I'm not writing, or that I'm not writing well, or in a way that is pleasing me or satisfying me. But I think that those quiet times are often some of the most productive of the times in an artist's life, because that's when I'm gathering, or thinking, or just sleeping, or just all of those other parts of our lives. I think this construction of failure, it's like, it's also one of the questions, so it's like, it's built on this particular structure that has often not invited me in anyway. And so if I fail at those criteria, it wouldn't matter if I achieved those criteria. I'm still not going to get let into that club in that same way. And so I might as well just be me and see what kind of happy accidents happen and see what happens if I live my whole life and allow that whole life into my work and rest sometimes and stop sometimes and do something different. So that the first poem I read for you, I thought it was going to be a sonnet, sort of one of my like page day things. It's simple, it's 140 syllables, you can do that. And for a while I thought of it as a half sonnet, 70 syllables, it really is. And then I was like, no, it is itself. So if I present it as a half sonnet, then it has failed to be something it was never trying to be. And so that is also part of it. It's just that when you put failure, that means that you were trying to achieve something and you haven't achieved that, as opposed to asking the art what it wants to be and what it wants to do. And quite often it has just exceeded that possibility. So it's just using a different rulebook if you use one at all.
I also think it's just a way to be really generous with yourself, kind of what you were saying, and it's just a way to be much kinder to yourself, to say that every failure or mistake is actually an opportunity for learning and not a reason to fight with yourself. And I think that's true for any sort of maker or creator or artist, or just like being a person.
I think, we're talking also so much of all of our work has to do with environmental peril, both the peril that we may face, and also that we are part of a system that is causing. And if we are thinking about conservation efforts and just efforts to preserve this planet and to stop species loss and et cetera, thinking in terms of failure means you just never start, right? It's like because it would be these are very difficult things to achieve. Thinking about social justice, it's centuries of failures, right? And so if I say, well, I can never fix these things, then I will never start. But it's also centuries of successes, right? That happen because people keep trying in smaller increments or try a different way or do something otherwise. And so I think failure is also that concept of failure is also part of a system of control. So if you tell women, if you tell artists, if you tell Black people, if you tell environmentally minded people that you might as well not even start because you're not going to succeed at this giant ambition that you've got, then you've got people who don't start and don't do anything. And I just don't choose to allow that system to control me in that way.
And just one more, and we're trying to end, but to go back to one of your early questions about the wrestling with responsibility or just thinking about historical and ancestral trauma is something that I often try to remind myself in my own work, and I think it's a part of it is just acknowledging the fact that I'm only here because so many people survived. And so it's not just that there's this, I like to think of, well, obviously acknowledging ancestral trauma, but also acknowledge that ancestral resistance, or resilience, sorry. And just, literally, the reason you're here is because a lot of people were able to survive something, or to succeed in.
So, I feel like we probably are closing out, and I want to end with a kind of question that hopefully we don't often get when we're talking about art. And I was curious what one thing in your life often as if it has nothing to do with your practice as an artist and your life as an artist, but that's deeply important to your person, right? Who, like, what's a thing that you value, that you care about, that may or may not directly come into the work?
It's a great question. I've never been asked that. Thank you for asking it.
You know, the first thing that came to my mind was something I mentioned to you earlier, and I've talked to Camille about too, but it totally has to do with my art, probably, at some point.
It all does.
Yeah, but it's my compost tumbler that I just look inside. I look at it every morning, I just watch it. And every time I put anything in there and I turn it, and it's like, I get so much pleasure from it. And my spreadsheet for my garden, I haven't started yet. I'm just like, really, this all, definitely, I'm like, the fact that I'm staring into my compost once or twice a day, I know, maybe in like 5 years it will show up in my work somehow. So that's probably okay.
Well, even the way you produce your work is
It's the compost.
And I'm a big composter, so I say that out of high praise. Like, some people will be like, oh my gosh, you just compared my...
No, I love it. So I'm going to look at question marks. Great.
It is a great one. The very first two things that came to mind was the sound of someone's voice when they're telling a story. It doesn't matter necessarily what the story is, but I really enjoy the upward and downward and the pause and the second thing is music. So perhaps the two are related because I can't imagine a life without music. I can't imagine a life without hearing sound, and I mean musical and non-musical sound. And perhaps today, because in the middle of the day, the first time, a lot of the times I went for a really long walk and just sat by Fountain at the end and just listened to everything. I could hear water behind me and a couple of birds I couldn't identify. Sound is a really, really, really important thing to me, whether it's the sound of my parents' voice, because I can't visit them, whether it's a cry, whether it's something like a deeply satisfying sound. Like I love the sound of things frying. There's something really beautiful about the pitch and texture and tenor of sound.
That one's really interesting to me because maybe one of the hardest things to translate in visual art. I mean, you have your little videos, but you don't do video installations, do you? Okay.
No, and that terrifies me. That just sounds really hard, but I love oral histories. I spend an awful lot of time on the Smithsonian website listening to oral histories. So it's just people sharing wisdom, insights, failures. It's wonderful.
I like asking that question of artists to kind of look a little bit around the corner of the thing that gets presented in the catalog and brochure, et cetera, just to get another wider sense of who you might be as an artist. It would probably be only fair to answer my own question since I did it like an actual summer. I think the answer would have been gardening until it didn't, in the middle, writing a book about gardening. And so now I've got a new hobby that's like an actual hobby. And so I've got my paddling. So it's the water, it's the being out on the water. I've been away from California long enough now that I'm not. Horse tooth isn't failing at the ocean, it's just horse tooth, right? Like, It's very nice, and so now I can be really, it's a really nice, horseshoes is our little resident. It's not little, it's actually quite sizable, like,
That's where we met this morning.
yeah, so now it's being being on a big floating bus. What do you think? Should we?
Lovely.
Thank you all for being present with us.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was really fantastic. That was really fantastic. I just want to thank everyone. Give everyone